Welcome back. Halftime of the Marietta High School Jackson Ironman game. And a reminder that tonight's halftime interview, as it is each week, brought to you by the Caddy Shack on Newport Pike, where great golf begins. It'll be a great time to stop out and check out the falling prices as the new season of golf approaches for the fall. Stop out and see Steve at the Caddy Shack. Halftime guest tonight is part of our special anniversary weekend as we celebrate 50 years of broadcasting here on AM 1490. Tomorrow is the actual day that the station went on the air back in 1946. And this is Johnny Wharff along with Big John Wharff, and one voice of the Tigers to another here. And I wanted to ask Big John just a few questions. Maybe we can reflect back on some old sports teams and some broadcast partners, and maybe for our listeners, some of the old Tiger days.
Well, Johnny, I guess let's go back to my first broadcast. I think it's kind of unique in the fact that I came to work here, final football game of the 1966 season. Boy, that's a long time ago. And Elmer Sanders was doing the play-by-play. And Elmer worked for another company and of course, had his daytime job. And as it got near, the game was being played at Newark, and no Elmer Sanders at 3 o'clock and no Elmer Sanders at 4 o'clock. And Sandy Geyer, who was the station manager at the time, said, "Big John, you better get ready. You may have to do this ball game." And I said, I've been in town like 48 hours and hadn't really even thought about it, was just going to go along with them to see what was going on. Larry Steinle did the color, so it's Elmer Sanders and Larry Steinle, and at about 5 o'clock, we're still not on our way to Newark, and in comes Elmer. Had flown in from an Airlight trip that he worked for Airlight and had flown in, and boy, they were ready to go, and away we go. I got in the back seat, Steinle and Elmer in the front seat, and we go to Newark. And we get there, and they get everything ready to go, and they go on the air. Well, to get to the important part of the story for me, I wasn't a part of the broadcast. They did talk to me at halftime, but during halftime on a Friday night in Newark, way back in 1966, they served hot dogs and hot chocolate to the press. And boy, it was cold. It must have been 0, and I remember like it was yesterday. And they served these hot dogs, and boy, I ate that hot dog and had that hot chocolate and made a comment on the air how good it was and how nice the hospitality was in below 0 Newark, Ohio. And to this day, I couldn't tell you who won the football game, but when I got home and was on the street Saturday morning in downtown Marietta, the good Catholic boy that I am, I must have been pulled over by a half a dozen to a dozen people saying, "Big John, what are you doing eating a hot dog on a Friday?" That's my first story ever about my sportscasting. Never said a word about sportscasting, but I certainly knew at the time, way back then, that boy, people did listen to WMOA radio.
If you want to know how many people are listening, say something wrong or do something wrong, and you'll find out pretty quick. I think that's a good story to illustrate that. What about broadcasters? Now, just me personally, I started out with Dick Long. I worked with Randy Wooden, and then Keith Wharton, and now Mark Bradley, and Tom Hushin has joined us this year, and of course Tom and Keith Wharton are doing the game tonight, so that's kind of unique. But what about some former broadcast partners with you?
Well, I'm only going to spend a little time on one of them, and I'm kind of proud of the fact that he did really start with me here at Marietta College and here at WMOA Radio, but that is Bill Rosinski, and what a tremendous career he has had since that time. He worked with me, and I can't give you the years. I've been here 2 different 12-year stints, way back in 66 to 78, and then again in 85 to present. And old Bill Rosinski worked with me for a number of years, and he really came along, worked for the Mutual Network for a while, did some college games of the week on that. A couple of years ago, got the job as the voice of the Atlanta Falcons, and as we speak this year, he is the new voice of the Carolina Panthers. So I guess his start here with Big John and what he picked up took him a pretty long ways. Bill Rosinski, one of my favorites as far as color goes, and I've worked with so many. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Mike Mcnamara. Mike has worked with me on Marietta College baseball for the last 10 years, and those are 2 great people, but I've worked with numerous people, as you mentioned, Randy Wooden, Ernie Hartong, Rich Galen. I mean, all those guys at one time or another, Bill White, all those guys at one time or another have done sporting events with me, and they've all been great experiences.
How about particular players that might stand out from when you did high school games, or even if it was an opposing team or a tough name? I know sometimes you get some hard to pronounce names and anything like that.
Well, I just couldn't tell you all the top athletes. That would be foolish to even try to do that. But a name that will stick in my life forever, and it doesn't even come back here to Marietta, Ohio, but it's a great story. I'm broadcasting in Sandusky, Ohio for a radio station up there that I worked at prior to coming here. And I went into Sandusky High School to do a football game, and I'm going through the lineup rosters and getting the names and everything down, and this name jumps at me, Isavelt Amison. And I thought it was a misprint, of course. I thought the guy's name was Roosevelt or something. And needless to say, I went to the other broadcaster that was doing the other team, and I said, this Isavelt Amison, what, is that a misprint? Or he said, no, he said, really, it's not a misprint. When Isavelt was born, his mom didn't know whether to name him after President Eisenhower or after President Roosevelt, so they just called him Isavelt. True story, so help me God.
That's a good one, too. We're going to take a break here. It's halftime, the Marietta-Jackson game, and we'll be back after this message from the Caddy Shack.
One of America's great radio stations, WMOA, celebrating 75 years of local radio.
Johnny Wharff talking with Big John Wharff, halftime show tonight for the high school game. And Big John, this past week we've had the opportunity to hear from some old voices, and quite frankly, it's been a lot of fun, and I would imagine brought back some memories.
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. I go back so far that I kind of relate to all of them, kind of old and new. As I mentioned before, I've had 2 stints here. I worked for quite a number of owners. Number one is I came to work here for Sandy Guy, great radio man, old-time radio. I mean, you came to work with a shirt and tie. You did things certainly not like we do them today. It was by the book, and by golly, you better do it. So he was the first owner that I had worked under, and then the heir of Fleischmann Margarine came in. Ernie Miner was his name, and he bought the radio station. He had a lot of money based on that, the Fleischmann, heir to the Fleischmann Margarine. Only was here a year or so, and he got in, Nixon was elected president, and he got a political job. Back in those days, you had to own a radio station 3 to 5 years. You just couldn't buy and sell like they do today. But he had got the opportunity to sell early because he was in politics, and the two didn't mix at that time. I think there's been so many relaxed rules by the FCC over the years, but that was pretty strict. But he could get out of the radio business after just a short ownership. And then Ray Rosenblum came. And Ray, I worked for Ray for about a decade and had some wonderful experiences under Ray, learned a lot about radio, and all of a sudden decided that I was kind of spinning my feet and I had to move on and do some other things. I always wanted to get involved in print. I mean, you could get the radio money in advertisement. I never seemed to get any print. So when I opened Phase 1 Productions, we did, and still do, a lot of print work from magazines and schedules and just numerous things. That you see around town on numerous occasions, a fair program and all these schedules at the different conferences, etc. And so we do a lot of that along with phone book covers and everything else. And so I got out of radio for about 10 years. But then when Washington Tech bought the radio station, they ran into some tough times, some things. They made some decisions that just didn't pan out, and they called me in as a troubleshooter back in '85, and I just decided, well, maybe I ought to be back in it. And really, they shouldn't have been in it at the time. And so I then, after working for all those different owners, became one myself. And so I've kind of seen both sides of the street. I think my best move was not to blow your horn any, but to bring you in with me the day I opened this radio station. I think you graduated from college and have been with me now 11, 12 years. And you've learned a lot about the business, and I don't know if I'm spilling any beans or not, but I've gone by the 60-year-old age group, and you're going to be taking this radio station over very shortly. Hopefully everything will be done by the end of the year, and I will be an ex-owner, and you might be an owner.
Okay. On that note, last thought, if we could, I think it's obvious how I got into the business, if following footsteps, but when we talked to Bob Zide and a lot of different people this week, and I find out about Big John Wharff, who was a skinny basketball player in high school and wore white bucks on the old street corner instead of tennis shoes. But how did you get into radio?
Well, when I got out of school at Ohio State in 1957, I wanted to be in sales, and I worked for General Tire and Rubber, and then jumped from there to the H.J. Heinz Company. And I had 2 weeks off at Christmas time, and a guy was looking for a salesman to help him on some Christmas radio in Port Clinton, Ohio. And I thought, well, I've got some time off. I'm going to go over there and test the waters. And I got selling radio over the holidays. Of course, it's a little easier then. I didn't know what January and February and March were going to bring. But anyway, boy, I kind of liked it. So I went back and talked to my boss with Heinz, and I just said, this is just something that I want to do. I think I want to make a change, and this is going to be it. And so it was just a shot in the dark. And when I went to work, there was a sales manager who was very interested in sports. His name was Eddie Lane, and I started doing, my golly, I got into sports by going on the ball games, doing nothing but keeping the stats, and for no pay. And then all of a sudden, the color man was sick one day, and that's how I ended up being a color man, because the other guy didn't show up. And after several years, and even back in the old days, I did the Ohio State Buckeye play-by-play in color in football and basketball. Back in those days, there was no network, and I'm talking, when I say back in those days, the early 60s, before I came here. And one day, Eddie Lane said, come on, I'm going to break you into this. And he got me started and walked away from me, left me for a quarter of a basketball game, and it just all, I guess, being in the right place at the right time, or somebody doesn't show and you get a shot, and that's the way I got started and everything, in the business anyway. All by mistake, I guess.
Okay, 50 years of radio, WMOA, you, Big John, a part of it for at least half that. It's been fun. Can we say it's been fun?
Oh, it's been a great ride.
All right.